that knows something is not right with Australia and can't really put their finger on what that exactly is. I like to think that I have my finger on the pulse, but I can't really articulate the problems with Australia as it is currently right now. But I have come across an interview that could arguably be one of the best interviews out there when it comes to succinctly explaining what's happening with Australia right now in a way that all Australians would understand. So today we're going to watch a clip from this interview, and you can find the full interview in the description. And I encourage you to watch every single second of it because, like I said, it's one of the best interviews I've ever heard in regards to the current situation in Australia, in regards to the housing crisis, to inflation, to the cost of living, and potentially some solutions to fix it. So if you do watch this interview and it makes a lot of sense to you, go and share it with your friends and family because it is one of the few interviews that everyone is going to understand. And we're going to watch a clip of it right now. And we're going to watch a clip of it right now in real time. And I'm going to give you a few of my thoughts, but it's really just a taste of what's to come. This guy should really be the Prime Minister of Australia. People ask me why I don't get into politics, why I don't like politics. And it's because there's not people like this in there, people that are pragmatic, people that pay attention to details, and people that actually offer solutions to the problems out there. And everyone knows that the issues that Australia is having right now are systemic. They're not one problem. They're a bunch of problems that are coming together in confluence. And this guy does an amazing job at explaining. His name is Matt Berry, and the channel is called Equity Mates. So without further ado, let's go and check out this clip from the channel. Like I said, I would encourage you to watch the whole thing. You can find a link of that in the description of this video. So let's go and check that out, guys. So if I go here and do this, let's just let this load. Okay.
We're in a situation right now where we should be the richest country in the world. And we were the richest country in the world in 1900. So we discovered gold in Ballarat in like 1853 or something rather. That led to a gigantic gold rush to the late 1800s in this country. We are a huge producer of natural resources, so sheep and beef and grain and so forth. And you can just walk around Melbourne and look at the buildings, right? In 1900, Melbourne was the richest city in the world. Full stop. The second richest city in the world was Buenos Aires. Now, the two countries of Australia and Argentina took very different paths from 1900 onwards. Argentina went down the path of socialism, right, and ended up in a complete disastrous situation. I have an office in Buenos Aires, and, so I know very much what goes on in that country, and that's recently corrected itself with Malay. And in fact, I think for the first time in many, many, many years, they've actually had a month where there's no food inflation. But normally the inflation is completely and utterly out of control, and you've got to adjust wages every month and this at the other, and it's a very destabilizing place to live and so forth. And then we went down the other path, right? And for a while, Australia was a great place to live, and we had manufacturing, for example, as a substantial portion of the GDP of this country. We made cars, we made a bunch of different things. We had whole supply chains for various things. And then we just went into this path of just easy, relentless growth, where it was just house prices drifting up and shipping iron ore and coal and gas and gold overseas. You would think a country with 1,200 years of coal supply would be an energy superpower. You would think a country with 28% of the world's uranium reserves would be an energy superpower. You would think a country with 20% of the world's gas exports, sometimes number one in the world for gas exports, sometimes number two in the world for gas exports, would be an energy superpower. You would think a country with 3.46 people per square kilometre would have cheap land and cheap housing, right? You would think a country that has, well, what is it, something like, we're third in the world for production of cobalt. We have 47% of the world's lithium production. We are fifth in the world for the production of, sixth in the world for production of copper, fifth in the world for the production of nickel. You'd think we'd be an energy and electronic and mechanical engineering superpower. We control 56% of the world's iron ore exports. You would think we'd be a steel superpower. We have cheap energy and we have abundant iron ore, and we turn that and elaborately transform that and other materials we have to become an export powerhouse. We should be the richest country in the world. Full stop. We have everything. right? But instead, we have the greatest erosion of wealth in the developed world, right? We have a cost of living crisis that is the mother of all cost of living crises. We have house pricing that is astronomically expensive. It doesn't make any sense anywhere in the world. A terrace house in Wallara is the same price as a cruise ship. It's literally a 2025 model 164 cruise ship or an $18 million terrace in Wallara. And it's a nice terrace, but I mean, come on, let's get some reality. And this is all the root cause of this. The cost of living crisis, the cost of land, and the root cause of that is mass immigration. We have the most expensive casual wages in the world, but again, it's not enough to live on. But that's caused because people need somewhere to live. And then we have an energy crisis because we stupidly are going down this path of, well, what about the environment, this, that, the other, we can't burn coal, etc. No, we're burning the coal. Every single thing we're digging out of the ground is being burnt. It's just being burnt by China or it's being burnt by Japan, right? It's all being shipped overseas and burnt. We're deluding ourselves that we think we're doing anything by not burning it here, completely deluding ourselves. The gas we send overseas, in many cases, is being re-exported. We send it to Japan, they on-sell it, right? And now we're actually going to import gas in the Eastern Seaboard, which is ludicrous because we don't have a gas reservation scheme, right? So we have a cost of living crisis caused by input costs such as land and wages, which comes back to land. We have an energy crisis through very poor energy policy, where we'll export all the raw materials to build renewable generators, which are energy negative on the energy that's consumed to get the materials out of the ground, which ship back to us are unreliable, which we can't, and as a result of such, we can't run a reliable manufacturing industry in this country. Manufacturing as a percentage of gross value add is 5.39%, which is on par with Botswana, where you go see cheetahs. It's on par with Liechtenstein, which is a financial haven. It has dropped from about 15, 16, 17, 18, 19% to 5%. It's about 1/3 of the averages for the OECD. This country is going to hell in a handbasket. We are 93rd in the Harvard Economic Complexity Index in terms of the complexity of things that we produce and how sophisticated they are and how much people can replicate them. Our economy in terms of sophistication and complexity is on par with Equatorial Guinea, where they don't have a cinema in the entire country, right? And so it is all being caused by government policy, which can be turned around on a dime.
I will say this about investment.
All right, guys, where do you actually start with that? I've been trying to say this for a very long time. When you export jobs overseas and you just become a source of supply for other countries, it not just creates flow-on effects in regards to, okay, well, the jobs go overseas as well, the jobs that are required for manufacturing and value adding to these primary resources goes overseas as well with them. But it creates a vacuum that needs to be replaced by other things. And this is the fundamental problem with what's happening in Australia at the moment. The housing crisis, the cost of living crisis, it all stems from the loss of manufacturing jobs and loss of value add in Australia. In the 60s and 70s, Australia was a manufacturing powerhouse. It's where things got made. We took the primary resources we're taking out of the ground and we're producing, and we were turning into value add, which then got exported overseas. And Australia kept that production here, which kept those jobs here. Now we are just one big pit that gets resources taken out of it, sent overseas to be produced, and then sold back to us at a markup. And this is a huge systemic problem with this country. There's a thing called economic complexity, which is what Matt just touched on there. We are 91st in the world when it comes to economic complexity. Like he was saying, there's countries like Botswana, which have the same sort of complexity in their economies as we do. All we do in Australia is we dig stuff out of the ground, we give that to other countries, we import education, and we teach people. And we sell kangaroos and koalas and the idea of a lifestyle to a whole bunch of tourists. That is all we do in Australia. And people can't get their heads around the fact that a lot of the wealth that is created in Australia is just squandered opportunity. Like Matt was saying we should be the richest country on the planet in Australia, but we are not because of a lot of poor decision making from politicians over the last 40, 50 years. And people wonder why I don't like politicians and I don't like politics. It's for that reason. In what world does it make sense to shut down manufacturing plants here just to send the stuff overseas for it to get made somewhere else for cheaper and then send it back? It just astounds me, the ignorance of Australians. Like the whole point about coal and coal being sent overseas to be burnt over there so that we don't burn coal here. It's just laughable. That coal gets burnt somewhere else. It still affects us. It's just we get none of the advantages of producing and manufacturing goods here that we lose by sending that stuff overseas. So I think, guys, I just wanted to make this a short stream before I head off. I think if you want to get a really good breakdown of the current economic situation of Australia and some potential solutions in a way that anyone can understand, go and watch the interview that's linked in the description of this live. That is where that interview is one of the best interviews I've ever heard when it comes to explaining this to the general population. And it's done in a way that is just facts, which a lot of people have ulterior motives and spin. Literally, this interview is just stating a whole bunch of facts for an hour. And I think it's one of the best interviews out there for that. So I just wanted to quickly come on and share that video because I think it's criminal that interview only has 20,000 views. That interview should have millions of views. If every Australian watched that, there would be riots in the streets. There would be a whole bunch of Australians going, hey, wait a minute, he's right. Why the hell is there some unhinged immigration plan in Australia? I'm all for immigration. Australia would not survive as a country without immigration. For every there's a growth rate of 1.6 in Australia. If it's less than 2.1, the country is declining. So we need immigration. But at the moment, it's just freaking unchecked and unhinged. Some days they're importing 500,000 people to the country. Some days it's 50,000. The government just cannot make up its mind about how many people need to come to Australia to make it sustainable from a growth perspective without completely stretching the housing market in Australia to the point where no one can afford to purchase a property or rent. Same with education. We have something that is mentioned in this interview is there's 800,000 students a year that come to Australia out of the 6 million total in the world. 800,000 come to here. Every single one of those students takes up accommodation. In Sydney, 15% of the total accommodation in Sydney is for students. Okay? Now, that is its own problems. Like a lot of the universities in Australia would go bankrupt without external students. And I think we need that import because we have nothing else. Australia doesn't have an economy. It has oil, it has resources in the ground that get exported, and it has education. But a lot of the housing crisis is created in Australia by unhinged immigration. And like I said, I'm not sitting here going, oh, don't let anyone into Australia. I just think it just needs to be better controlled and it just needs to be better thought out. The reason that so many people are coming into this country is because we rely so much the government relies so much on personal tax returns that it needs that immigration. Otherwise, the country will slowly go bankrupt. There's less and less corporation tax happening. There's less and less royalties coming from GST as people start to spend their money on GST-free goods and services because they have to. And as industries move away from coal and gas and things like that, there's less money coming in from GST. And because of that, the government has to rely more and more on personal taxes. And how do you create personal tax income as a government? You import labor in at the age that they work, and you tax those people. So it's the government's motive for doing it. It's just completely unhinged. They don't understand the long-term ramifications of what they're doing, right? It feels like the government just focuses on the 3 years ahead of them, and that's it. It's like we get 500,000 people come to the country now. In 6 years, that's someone else's problem. That's not Albanese's. That's not our problem. That's not our government's problem. That's the next government's problem. And, I'm not saying China is the best country in the world or anything like that, but it's, like the one thing you have to give China credit for is they plan in 50-year blocks, right? Their government plans in 50-year blocks. They don't give a crap what happens in the next year. They don't give a crap what happens in the next 2 years. They're planning 50 years ahead because Xi Jinping knows he's going to be in power for as long as he wants to be in power. So why think short term? You think long term, like the Belt and Road strategy is a long-term strategy. That what they're doing in the South China Sea is a long-term strategy. The biggest failing of the Australian people is the fact that governments think 3 years at a time. That's the biggest problem. It's not bad in Melbourne, not that good for a single man over 50. Yeah, it's crazy that we have the highest casual wages in the world, and yet people can't even afford to live on it. There is something fundamentally broken with our country that there is no end in sight in fixing. I talk about this a lot. It's like there's no one solution that's going to fix this. It requires a complete overhaul of the thinking of the Australian government and the Australian people, which is not going to happen. But it just goes like, if more people were to watch this interview that I just shown, if more people were to watch this interview that I've got linked in the description, there'd be more people conscious of what's happening around them, which may open their eyes and may make them consider what they do going forward. And I think we all have a responsibility to share a video like this far and wide that really is just laying the facts out there with no ulterior motive, laying the facts out there, and letting people decide for themselves if what they're listening to is the right thing or the wrong thing. And I think, honestly, that is the biggest problem we have right now, is we have a population that really is just so ignorant about what's happening to them that they really just, it's not even malicious. There's so many Australians that are just ignorant of this current situation, precarious situation Australia is in. They just look and go, oh, I've got money in my bank account, then Australia, it must be working. Not realizing that we are so tied to China right now that if anything happens to China, Australia, and I say this without exaggeration, if China was to slow down and stop buying our natural resources and stop sending students here to study, Australia would go from a first world country to a third world country. It's that bad. We are 91st in the world for economic complexity. Almost all of our exports go to one country. And we rely so heavily on those exports for the wealth of this country. If that was to disappear overnight, or was to slow down even, what can Australia rely on as a replacement for that? We've exported all the jobs overseas. We've exported all the value add to all this primary production overseas, and we've destroyed the manufacturing industry in Australia. So what can Australia do if China does slow down? It literally can't do anything. If China was to slow down, Australia's done. And that's really scary to consider. But it's the truth. And I would argue with anyone that thinks that's not the case. Toyota plant. Goody, that is a fantastic example. Like, car manufacturing in Australia in the 70s was a huge employer, was a huge value add of steel in this country. We had not only the iron ore was coming out of the ground and going into steel refineries that were here in this country, it was then going into value add and end production in Ford and Holdens and GMs. Then it got too expensive to produce cars here, so they shipped them overseas. And then they decided, oh, actually, we don't need the steel plants here because they're dirty. Let's ship all those overseas and just buy our steel from China. Oh, that makes a whole bunch of iron ore companies rich, and that makes a whole bunch of people that work with those industries rich, but it reduces the economic complexity of this country. You know, when you actually look at it, there's not many countries, and there's not many businesses in Australia that manufacture products here. Red Arc is one of them. Some of the caravan manufacturers produce caravans here in Australia, but most people, the manufacturing is done overseas and the assembly is done here. Manufacturing stopped in many Western countries. Issues with labor costs, people would buy cheaper cars from China. That is true. That is the root cause of what it is. But there was also nothing done by the government to try and keep that manufacturing here. The reason that China was able to become the manufacturing center of the world is because of a lot of government intervention. But the government didn't really intervene to try and keep that manufacturing here in Australia. Australia used to be self-sustaining. Industries have been damaged. Manufacturing is almost non-existent. Farming is in trouble. 100%. I am really scared for Australia if China slows down. And I'll be so much gladder I'm here in Penang when that happens, because it's going to hit Australia like a ton of bricks, and most Australians will have no idea what hit them. That's the scary thing about it. Anyone that's watching this is so much further ahead of the curve because at least you're conscious of it. Most Australians have no idea what's coming. They have no idea how closely their job is tied to the Chinese economy, even if it's not directly. You know, if you own a local coffee shop, you're going to be just as affected as someone that works in a mine site in the Kimberley, because who do you think buys those coffees? It's immigrants, it's the people that have jobs, and it's people that come here and study. That's who buys those coffees. And if people aren't buying coffees and they're worried about just getting the essentials of life, that affects you. That affects everyone. And that's what people don't understand about the current situation in Australia. Is just, I think the first step to improving the current situation of Australia and potentially having a chance of getting out of this is people understanding the problem and people being aware of the problem. Right now, there's a lot of people that aren't aware of the problem. Got a couple of questions here. Singapore, Malaysia is heaven on earth. Look, Malaysia and Singapore have their own problems, but you know, there's 2 car manufacturers here. Like, it's a pretty self-sustaining country. Kiwi living, what countries were you thinking of living in before Malaysia? Did you consider, say, Thailand? We did. We chose Malaysia in the end just because it's a little bit aligned from a family perspective. It's a Muslim country. We don't drink, so it didn't like Thailand's perfectly good, but like there's a lot to do here as a family. And there's a lot of families in Thailand. We just decided Malaysia was our thing. Kiwi living and working own business in Singapore, Indonesian, you're 100% spot on. Life in Malaysia is okay, still language barrier. Do you need a visa extension every 90 days? Depends what visa you're on. We're on a 2-year visa here, so we don't necessarily need that. China won't stop. It's a huge market. I agree, Billy. I agree. China is not going to stop, but what if it slows down? What if it has a 15 to 20% slowdown? How do you think that's going to affect this country? If China slows down by 20%, Australia's going to slow down by 60. That's the problem. It's not that China won't stop. It's just like, what if half of the stuff it's buying from us, it just doesn't buy anymore because it has no demand for it? You know, what if the housing market in China slows down, which it is right now, and the demand for Chinese steel slows down, which causes demand for iron ore to slow down, which is Australia's largest export. If demand for iron ore slows down by 10%, that's going to lead to hundreds of thousands of jobs going, because the price of iron ore is so low at the moment that what will they do? Yeah, and you're right. True, Sayed. Asian area will grow. Like the economy, there will be other markets for this stuff. There's other markets for our iron ore. There's other markets for our coal. There's other markets for our resources. But it will take time to discover those new markets and for those new markets to absorb the supply that we have. You know, the supply that we supply China is unprecedented in the world. It's not a small amount we are sending to China. It's going to take several countries to absorb that kind of supply from Australia. You know, just iron ore. The amount of iron ore that we send to China is unprecedented. And it's not like India can just pick up that slack. I'm going to come with you. Or are you leaving right now?
Well, it's not 5, isn't it?
Yeah.
I've got your stuff ready if you want to come.
Okay. Hey, guys, I've got a scoot. I'm just going to head off. We're doing something with the kids. Thank you so much.